When I was 6 years old, a little girl of the same age went missing in my hometown. Ellie Bakerfield. She lived just a few streets down. It happened one night in early summer. She was just snatched right from her bed. There was no sign of forced entry at the house. The perimeter alarm hadn't gone off or anything. The only evidence that anything was amiss was a houseplant in the hallway outside her room that had been knocked over on its side. Her parents found her empty bed in the morning and called police immediately. It's a relatively small town, about 20,000 people. Bad things happen here sometimes, sure, but nothing like this. Nothing like a little girl just vanishing without a trace. Everyone was shocked. How could something like this happen here? Furthermore, who could be responsible? My parents were particularly upset. They were friends with the Bakerfields. My dad was a repairman, and he was the guy they always called when they needed work done around the house. Mom played bridge with Mrs. Bakerfield on Sundays. Ellie and I would play together too, though I don't remember her much. Just vague impressions that have grown dull with time. The first few days after her disappearance were rough. There were no obvious suspects, no creepy uncles, no weird family friends, no registered sex offenders in the vicinity. The police, of course, questioned the family and everyone close to them, but they had no leads. My parents were very supportive during that time. I remember staying with my grandma more often because Dad was helping organize search parties and Mom was cooking for the family. Eventually, Mom brought me to Grandma's and we stayed there for a few weeks. Grandma lived about 40 miles away in a neighboring town. We'd been planning on staying there for a while anyway, since we were renovating our house at the time. We'd finished with the downstairs, but now Dad was working on the upstairs, which meant we couldn't sleep in our bedrooms. Mom decided we would make the trip early and Dad would stay behind to keep helping the Bakerfields look for Ellie and to get some more work done on the house. They really thought they'd find her. My parents were convinced that she was alive and well, probably somewhere in town. They just had to track her down, is all. But days went by, and then those days became weeks, and soon after it was months. After some time, the police's suspicions shifted to the family. The Bakerfields were brought in for questioning, and Mr. Bakerfield was interrogated for 6 hours. That was even worse. This poor family that had lost their only daughter was under suspicion of her murder. Because that's what it was at this point, murder. Everyone thought it. Even if nobody said it, everyone was sure by this point that she was dead and that soon they'd find her body. Well, they never did find her body, and the Bakerfields never were charged with murder. How could they be, with no evidence? The case grew cold, and people gradually began to resume living their lives. Mom and I moved back into the house. People started to look sideways at the Bakerfields, avoiding them, refusing to speak to them. Even so, they never left our town, and they never stopped looking for Ellie. It's been a long time since then. I'm in my 30s now, married with a little girl of my own, Eloise. I inherited the house after my mother passed away. My dad died a decade before she did. Even all these years later, I think of Ellie sometimes and of her parents. Her father died by suicide about 5 years ago. Couldn't take the strain of waiting anymore. Her mother, though, wouldn't leave the house. Not until Ellie was found. It's hard not to think of Ellie when I look at Eloise. I wonder what I would do if someone snatched my child up like that. I hate thinking about it. A few months ago, Roger and I decided we would do some renovations to the upstairs. We planned to give my childhood bedroom to Eloise, but since it's so small, we thought we'd knock out the wall, separating it from the neighboring spare room. Eloise loved the idea, of course. She made us promise that she could have unicorn wallpaper. Funny, the things we think are important as children, isn't it? We started taking down the wall, and it wasn't very long into our project that we found something. Inside the wall, there was this sort of box. A wooden box that had no reason to be there. I'm not much of a construction expert myself, so I thought maybe it was nothing. But then I realized it wasn't even attached to the wall. It had just been stuck there inside. My husband helped me take it out and put it on the ground. The lid of the box was nailed on. I pried the nails off while my husband stepped out into the hallway to answer a phone call. I opened the box, and there was this smell. Inside was a tarp. I reached in to grab it, and it felt damp. I lifted it out of the box and started to unravel it on the floor. As I did, the smell grew stronger until it was overpowering. Inside, there wasn't much left. I screamed, and Roger came running. When he saw what I'd found, he escorted me out of the room. Actually, he practically carried me. I was a shrieking, panicking mess, and there was no way I could walk on my own. He was just barely able to prevent Eloise from running into the room to see what the fuss was about. We called the police, obviously, who retrieved the remains and blocked off the house. Roger took Eloise and me to stay at a hotel. I couldn't stop crying. Eloise asked me what was wrong, offered to give me her favorite Barbie if it would make me feel better. I just cried harder and hugged her so tight that I thought I'd never be able to let go. The police were able to confirm Ellie's identity by her dental records. Ellie's mother was notified. I was at the police station when she arrived, having just given my statement to the officers. I heard her sobbing these terrible cries. I've never heard anything like that. It was like 30 years of grief coming out all at once. I wonder if she still thought, somewhere deep inside, that Ellie might still be alive. A few days after her remains were positively identified, the police announced the case had been solved and released the name of her murderer. Mrs. Bakerfield died just 2 months afterward. I think all this time, the only thing keeping her alive was Ellie. Now that she'd been found, she could move on, like a ghost that had been trapped on this earth for too long. As for me, my husband and I have decided to sell the house. We've been staying with friends while we try to decide whether or not to stay in town. If we should buy another house, where we should move if we do. Well, I guess it's more accurate to say that Roger's the one thinking about those things. I'm thinking about my father, about how he organized all those search parties, about the years he spent doing their repairs, becoming familiar with every inch of their house, how he never once thought the Bakerfields were guilty, even when everyone else began to suspect. But most of all, I think of the years I spent sleeping in that bedroom with her body not 8 inches from my head.